Good, good. Right, so we're going to jump in. So I'm going to introduce two speakers. They're my colleagues. You are with absolute expert tonight. You've got Jo Peters. She is actually a clerk herself for, what, 16 years or so. She's also works at Scribe as customer success, and she's Silka qualified. I'm not sure if you all fully understand that. It's a special qualification that you can get to be a clerk, so she's a professional. And then we've got Hannah Driver here. Hannah, she's our head accountant at Scribe. She's also the product manager for our accounts package. And yeah, she's worked with, I mean, between both Jo and Hannah, they've worked with hundreds and hundreds of town and parish councils, getting them through the year-end process. For your clerks, it's a super stressful time for them this year, you know, and that's what we do. We help clerks get through this stressful time by using our software and our support. So do you guys want to say hello?
Hello, everybody.
Jo?
Hello, everybody. Hello.
So yeah, so Jo, you're down in Suffolk, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm in Suffolk. Yeah, I'm clerk to 3 small rural councils here in Suffolk.
Cool, cool. And Hannah, you're based in Norfolk, where I am.
Indeed, yes, absolutely.
Good. And the kids are all happy tonight and you're able to do your talk.
I've put them on YouTube. They should be fine.
Put on YouTube, so they're not going to cause any trouble.
Well, who knows?
Good.
But, you know, add some excitement to the evening.
Why you should have got them to attend?
I think they'd be bored after 5 minutes.
Okay,
Hi,
anyway,
everyone.
right. Hi. That was Linda, I think.
Hi from Bean Parish Council in Kent.
Oh, good, good. Hi, Tracy. Good shout out. Right, we are going to jump in. Got 62 people on it. So are you kicking off, Hannah?
I am, yes.
Good.
Lovely. Thank
Over
you.
to you, Hannah.
Perfect. Okay, everybody, let me share my screen with you. There we go. Lovely. So this session indeed is understanding the year end for councillors. So the first half is going to be me, and I'm going to talk you through what the AGAR is and what it involves. And then I'll be passing over to Jo, who will take you through the process for the meeting and what happens beyond the AGAR being approved. Also worth just mentioning at this point as well that the screenshots and the things I'm going to be talking about are based on the English version of the AGAR. I think I noticed there was a few people from Wales in. You're absolutely welcome to join in, but just be aware that there's some slight differences there, but generally the procedures and the things we talk about will be very, very similar. Okay then, so starting off, what is the AGAR? So this is what we're thinking about in terms of the year-end document that we need to complete. And the intention of this evening is for you to go away with a better understanding of what that is, so that when you come to reviewing it, you've got a good feel of what you're actually looking at. The AGAR then, it stands for the Annual Governance and Accountability Return. Council financial year is the 1st of April to the 31st of March. So obviously we're fast approaching the end of the month. So that was coming up that we're going to need an AGAR completed up to the end of this month. The sections within that AGAR are the exemption certificate, if relevant, and we'll talk about that more in a moment. The internal audit report, Section 1, the annual governance statement, and Section 2, the accounting statement. So I'm going to take you through all of those elements of the AGAR as we go through. Also have to understand which AGAR form needs to be completed, and that will be determined by the size of your council. So as you can see at the top, Form 1 is if there are no financial transactions, so I wouldn't imagine that applies to any of your councils, but they would therefore do a certificate of exemption. Form 2 are for those councils that are under the gross total of £25,000 of income and or expenditure. So if you meet that criteria along with being in formation for more than 3 years and also not having issues with your prior audit, you are able to exempt yourself from audit. So that means you still have to complete the AGAR. So all the things that we're going to talk about still has to be done by the council, but it means that you do not have to send it off to the external auditor, and you are able to certify yourself as exempt. So that will save you the external audit fee if you do not send it off. Form 3 are for councils above that £25,000 threshold, under 6.5 million, or those of you who are unable, so you don't meet all the criteria, or do not wish to certify as exempt. So it could be that you meet the criteria to be exempt, but actually you would still like to send it off and have an external audit go over the AGAR that you submit to them. Mentioned the internal audit report and also talked about sending it off to the external auditor. So useful, I think, just to clarify the difference, because that sometimes comes up as a question. So the internal auditor is independent to the council and must be appointed by the council to come in and complete the internal audit report. So that will be them reviewing the council's procedures and controls, and all councils should have an internal audit at least annually. Then we have the external auditor, and that is who the AGAR will be submitted to, unless you are exempt. But they are determined by the county in which you are located. So you do not, as a council, need to appoint an external auditor. You will already have one in place, and they will be in contact with your clerk RFO to send the forms that need to be completed. But you would need to engage an internal auditor, and hopefully that's something that's happening within your council, probably around now, somebody coming in to come and do that report. Okay, then thinking back to our sections of the AGAR, the first one is the internal audit report, and this is an extract from the form. So if you haven't seen an AGAR before, it might be worth going back and having a look at what your council did for last year to get a feel of what it looks like, the information that's in there, what needs to be completed. You'll see some of the screenshots in there, but there's lots of information and checklists to help the clerk through the process of completing it, but also to give you an understanding of what's included in it. So as you can see here, there's some yes, no answer responses to these things that the internal auditor will be looking at as part of their report, part of their audit when they come in and checking those things out. So as it says there, you'll have the internal audit report, and at the very least, the summarised conclusions will allow completion of this section of the AGAR, and they will be considering things that are listed here, such as the calculation of the precept, the way the asset register is maintained, and checking those things. As I said previously, it's carried out at least annually, but the scope and extent will depend on the council's size and circumstance. So if you're a particularly large council or have a lot going on, you may find that it works to have an internal audit on a more regular basis, or certainly to dip in and look at things in a more detailed level at certain points throughout the year. If you're smaller, then you will have it annually, and that tends to be in line with this time of the year, so allow you to complete that section of the AGAR. Moving on then, we have section 1, which is the annual governance statement. So again, similar to what we've just looked at, in that we again have yes, no assertions to these things that it's asking us to respond to. Okay, you can see some examples from there. So basically it's reviewing the effectiveness of the system of internal control. So hopefully these are all things that are taking place within your council. So the way things are done, procedures, processes are all taking place to allow you to be able to respond yes as a council to these assertions in this list. If that's not possible, and therefore you need to give a no response, it would need to be accompanied by an explanation as to why that is to the external auditor and how it's going to be resolved moving forward. It's quite closely related to the internal audit coming in, so there's some bits in there about having an adequate system of internal audit and control. So by having an internal audit will allow you to respond yes to some of these assertions as well. So there's quite a link here about the way things are being done in the correct manner. Moving on then, we now have section 2, the accounting statements, which is the numbers bit. Okay, so this is where the sort of real work comes in, and as John mentioned, that sort of additional work that your clerk / RFO, I use that term interchangeably because we deal with so many clerks who are also the RFO, and really where the work comes in. So understanding firstly that goes over and above what you would normally receive on a sort of monthly or meeting basis in terms of the financial information to actually collate this data. But what I want to do briefly with you tonight is just go through the boxes that you see here to give you a brief overview of what will be going in there, so that when you're reviewing it, you've got a better feel and understanding of how it's broken down from the cash book information, so the financial information of your council and how it's populated into these boxes. Before we do that though, just important to also understand which accounting approach is being used to complete this form. There are 2 approaches, receipts and payments and income and expenditure. So receipts and payments is a simple form of accounting where it just records transactions at the point at which they were paid. So very simply, it's what happened, when it happened, regardless of when it relates to. And then income and expenditure is more in line with what you might recognise in sort of more business style accounting, particularly if you have a stronger financial background. So it considers the period to which transactions relate. So thinking about the timings of those transactions. And that means that often there will be therefore year-end adjustments, so things such as creditors, debtors, accruals, prepayments, to take account for things to get them into the right financial year. So for income and expenditure councils, that's mandatory for councils that are over 200,000 gross income, gross expenditure for the financial year for 3 consecutive years. So it could be that you're under the threshold and you go above the threshold for 1 or 2 years. Maybe you have a large grant or some SIL money comes in and it pushes you over the threshold. If that's not the case for 3 consecutive years, you do not have to move to income and expenditure. Having said all that, though, you can be much smaller and perfectly within your rights to use receipts and payments, but opt in to use income and expenditure if you so wish. So that's 2 different approaches, and it does mean that slightly different as to how these boxes are completed. If you are in receipts and payments, it is the gross total. So it includes VAT and the values that goes into the boxes. And it's generally quite simple, hopefully, to work it out. Information is taken directly from the cash book. In income and expenditure, because of these additional adjustments that go in, there's some more work around this, and that is also not included. So that will constitute an adjustment at the end of the year. So it is net values. If you're not sure which approach the council is using, you can look back at your AGAR of last year and on the accounting statements, if box 7 and 8. So if we look here, our balance is carried forward, and box 8, which is our total value of cash, i.e. our bank reconciliation, are the same value, then we're almost certainly working in receipts and payments. So quite useful just to understand the difference, because then it's important to then see how that filters through to what the figures that actually go into these boxes that we were just talking about. So as I said then, thinking about each of these individual boxes that you're going to be reviewing as part of the information you'll receive from your clerk RFO, just a bit more to think about what's going to go in them very briefly. So box 1 is balances carried forward. So that's our starting position for the financial year and should and must be equal to box 7 of last year. So the final position of last year becomes our opening box position for this year. Box 2 is precept. It says also rates or levies. Now rates or levies refers to drainage boards only who also complete this form. So this is purely just the precept. So the precept amount that you have received in your council. Box 3 is total other receipts. So this is all other income, everything else other than the precept. Remember, gross totals, so including VAT for those councillors working in receipts and payments, net totals in income and expenditure. Box 4 is staff costs, but it's only the core staff costs, so salaries, tax, NI, pension. It may be that the way you report staff costs within your council and against your budget is different to the value that goes into box 4 if you're including staff costs such as expenses or training. They do not go into box 4 because it is just the core salary. So there may be a difference here, so it's useful to understand why that is. Box 5 is loan interest or capital repayment. So if your council have any loans, then any repayments against that loan would go into that box. Box 6 is other payments. So again, this is all other payments other than what is staff cost or loan repayment. So box 4 and box 5. And again, remembering that we're working with gross totals in receipts and payments, net totals in income and expenditure. Box 7 is our balances carried forward. So this is the sum of our boxes above, being 1, our opening balance, plus our precept, plus our other receipts, less our staff costs, less our loan repayments, and less our other payments. Do make sure that it adds up, because I have seen examples of submitted accounting statements to an external auditor where the sum does not actually add up. So a good check just to do as part of the process. Box 8, as we talked about briefly, is the total value of cash and short-term investments. So that is our bank reconciliation. as at the 31st of March, and receipts and payments users will have the same value in both box 7 and box 8. If you councillors working in receipts and payments and the values are different, then something's been done incorrectly. Income and expenditure users will have different values because box 7 has been amended for the value of all the adjustments that are put through to represent the actual things that are relating to the year itself, not actually what just took place. Box 9 then is our total fixed assets and our long-term investments. So generally, this is simply the original purchase value. So it can sometimes not bear any real resemblance to assets that are held and the current value of them, because generally it is reported as the original purchase value. So do ensure consistency with that reporting, and also remember that there is no depreciation. So again, if you come from a strong financial background and you're used to the depreciation of assets, you need to forget that here. That does not happen. And then box 10 is total borrowings. So that is what is outstanding on our loans as at the 31st of March. So that is the accounting statements and those boxes. And as I said, that's the work really involved in collating the information from the cash book to populate those boxes. There are some other documents as well that go along to the external auditor alongside the AGAR. So we have the bank reconciliation as at the 31st of March. So this should reconcile to the statements and to box 8 on the accounting statement. So good check as well that you can see that information and how that all ties up. We then have the explanation of variances. So if we think about the current financial year, so if we go back all the way through here again, remember we're completing on the right-hand side. Worth saying that I haven't got the current year's version of this, so this is last year's version, but we'll be completing the boxes on the right-hand side. It's compared to the prior year, so on the left-hand side, and any significant variances need to be explained to the auditor. Generally, it's variances over 15%, but I haven't given a specific variance here because it is different, slightly different depending on which external auditor you have, and there are a few, so it's worth being very specific and checking the requirements that they set out for the variances that they need explaining. But it's important also to remember that full numerical explanations must be provided, so actually giving a breakdown of what the variance is and how it is made up in numerical terms. And then there is the reconciliation between box 7 and 8. So that's only relevant to councils that have completed the accounting statements in income and expenditure, because box 7 and 8, remember, will be the same in receipts and payments, different in I&E. So it needs to be explained from a list of the adjustments, debtors, creditors, etc., to explain that difference. Lovely. So that's taken me through everything I wanted to go through with you with regards to what is included as part of the AGAR. And I'm now going to stop sharing and hand over to Jo, who will take you through the next part of our session. Over to you, Jo.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you. So I'm going to talk to you today about the year-end process and what you should know about the procedure and what happens at the meeting when the accounts are approved. At year end, after the 31st of March, your clerk will start to prepare the end of year accounts. This includes finalising the cash book and carrying out a bank reconciliation as at the 31st of March. I've included examples of these below for you to see. So this is the cash book and this is a bank reconciliation. These are obviously in Scribe. Once the end of year accounts have been finalised, the internal audit needs to be carried out, and a copy of the report received from the internal auditor should be circulated to all councillors. To show a clear financial picture at year end, your clerk may prepare a reserves report, and this will show any funds at year end that are earmarked for projects. You can see an example of a reserves report below. So this shows here that we have some earmarked funds here and some capital funds here for the village hall, and it gives an earmarked reserve total, just to make that clear. A significant of variances report will be completed, and this will explain any variances between this year and last year, as Hannah just explained earlier. If your council does not have a turnover of either 25,000 in income or expenditure, then you will be exempt from having an external audit, and an exemption certificate will be needed to be approved by the council. You can see an example of an exemption certificate here. and this will be approved at the meeting. Your clerk would have prepared all this with the figures that she needs to put in there. So what to expect at the meeting? The end of year accounts must be approved by the council no later than the 30th of June. Once the end of year accounts have been finalised, there will be an agenda item to approve the end of year accounts and the bank reconciliation as at the 31st of March. Your clerk would have completed the annual governance form, which is also called an AGAR in us clerks' terms, and the council are required to approve sections 1 and 2 of this at the meeting. Section 1 is more about ticking that the correct financial procedures have been carried out throughout the year, including an annual review of your standing orders and financial regulations, your risk assessment, etc. The annual review of the effectiveness of the internal audit should, however, have been carried out prior to year end and along with the appointment of your internal auditor. And section 2 is about the numbers, as Hannah covered earlier. The council may also approve the completion of the internal audit report at this meeting, and your clerk should have provided you with a copy of this prior to the meeting for your review. I'm now going to talk to you about what happens after the AGAR has been approved. Once the AGAR has been approved by the council, an exercise of public rights notice needs to be placed on the council's website or your notice boards. Some clerks put it on both. This notice gives any interested parties an opportunity during a 30-day period to inspect the accounts, and that must include the first 10 working days of July. The dates for this notice are usually set by the external auditor, but these can be changed to meet each individual council's needs. This notice will also provide details for the clerk and the external auditor, and it will also advertise when the clerk is available to be contacted if anybody would like to inspect the accounts. Smaller councils, or councils under 25,000 threshold, are exempt from having an external audit, but they are still required to carry out the following under the Transparency Code for small authorities. They must send the external auditor a copy of the signed exemption certificate to prove their exempt status. Various documents must then be placed on the council's website, including a signed copy of the certificate of exemption, a signed copy of section 1 of the AGAR, signed copy of section 2 of the AGAR, a copy of any explanation of significant variances report, the bank reconciliation as at the 31st of March, and finally, a copy of that notice of period for exercise of public rights. Larger councils, however, with either a gross income expenditure over 25,000 must return to the external auditor by email or post, not both, and the external auditor does normally give a date when these do have to be returned by to your clerk, a copy of the following: signed copies of sections 1 and 2 of the AGAR, a copy of the bank reconciliation, a copy of the exercise of public of rights notice, and a copy of the internal auditor's report, which is within the AGAR, and your internal auditor would have filled in that section. Once the documents are submitted to the external auditor, sometimes further information is required. If this applies to your council, the external auditor will email the clerk details of what additional information is required and will provide a date when this must be sent by. If your clerk, however, requires extra time, most external auditors are very good and they will grant an extension for them. Once the external audit is complete, your clerk will receive notification from the external auditor, and a report with any necessary comments will be emailed to them. If the external auditor is not satisfied that the information sent is correct or inadequate procedures have not been carried out throughout the financial year, this can then result in the council receiving a qualified audit. Once the external audit report has been received, there will be an agenda item at a meeting to approve the completion of the external audit. And this information, along with the external auditor's report, can be placed on the council's website. Hopefully this session has provided you with insight to all the important information that you are required to understand when it comes to year end and approving the accounts. Thank you, John.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Joe and Hannah. So we are going to take questions. We've got 15 minutes to do that. So raise your hand and I'll call you up to ask questions. While you're getting ready to raise your hands, I'm just going to share a little bit about Scribe accounts. Just take 2-3 minutes of your time. So just think of your questions, raise your hands. So the first thing about Scribe accounts is purpose-built for town and parish councils. So all the things that Hannah and Joe spoke about, it's all built into the product, and it's super accessible. So here I'm just going to Google, type in Scribe accounts, and then I sign in. I actually already signed in earlier, and I log in. So anyone can log in from anywhere, any device. You can also log in on your mobile device there, or your iPads, and you can get read-only access. So what clerks do, a lot of clerks do, they give their councillors read-only access so they can access the package at any time. And particularly this new dashboard that we've built, councillors particularly love it, because it's very straightforward to get a snapshot of the current financial status of the council, your income and expenditure in the last month, outstanding invoices, your current bank balance, the days since your last bank reconciliation gives you an idea of how up to date the information is, how much budget you spent this year, the total value of assets, and then a more of a visual overview of all your cost centers, cost codes. So normally your finances are structured into these kind of cost centers and cost codes. And then you can see very easily there's a bit of red there, overspent, over budget there, and how much is left to spend. And then you get your full reserves breakdown. So that's a lot more easier to see than like what the normal reports that some people might like them. But you can get them more detailed reports here with the actual numbers and variants and everything like that. When it comes to year end, it's super easy for your clerks. All they have to do is enter all their transactions, as you can see here, as payments and receipts, etc. And then as long as they just add all their transactions in there, do their bank reconciliation, then at the end, you just come along and you can generate your annual return really easily, get with all the specific information in each box there. So super stress-free. And it's really something you should think about, reducing, the stress of your clerks, also the opportunity cost. So if they're spending a lot of time doing their accounts, what else could they be doing with that time? I love this example of one of our customers, Sally Ferguson. We asked her, what have you done with the time you've saved from doing all this administration? And she's got a precept of £16,000. She's got really good at raising grants, and she's used that time to raise grants, and she's raised 75k of grants. So more than, that's 4 times the amount of her precept, and with that she's made environmental changes to her changes to her buildings to make them more environmentally friendly, and she's also opened a community cafe 6 days a week employing local youngsters. So that's a really good example of the opportunity cost over admin. Also, there's other kind of hidden things like if you're sending spreadsheets around, that's kind of a risk, particularly around data. If it's in the cloud, it's backed up all the time. But if you ever get PII data in those spreadsheets, and there is a freedom of information request or right to be forgotten request, it could be in tons of copies of spreadsheets mixed amongst the team members and also the councillors. But here you have like a CRM, you got all the information on a particular contact, files related to that contact, and all bookings, etc., transactions related to that. So it gives you peace of mind. That's about it really. The product starts at £12 a month and goes up to more 23 and beyond. And it's not just that. I won't go into, we've got allotments, bookings and cemetery, and they're all integrated in there. So if you've got any of those features, it's all integrated in there. So I see that.